Welcome to Choose Courage Inc., where we skip the boring intros and jump straight into reimagining business and workplace experiences with We Ain't Afraid to Go There conversations. You're about to hear another conversation with the one and only brilliant Kevin Bethune, and woo, this one goes deep. We get into those moments when you're faking hope, right? In a system you no longer believe in. Whether it's corporate, religious, or cultural, we get into all of it. We talk about connection between healing and what it really takes to create something honest, human, new. If you're sitting in a season of disillusionment, if you're wondering how to move forward when everything feels like it's breaking down, this one's for you. Let's get it. I think for both of us, we know how important it is to be creative, but also the role of hope within that. Because you can't have this relationship with imagination without also having a relationship with hope. But I know for me personally, I've had these moments where I've had to, to lack of better words, fake hope in a situation that I was secretly losing faith in. And I'm wondering, as you've been thinking about your work across innovation, around design and creativity, if you're able to maybe speak about to a moment where maybe you've had to kind of navigate that temptation or that moment of faking hope in something that you were secretly kind of questioning or losing faith in.
I think the memory that immediately comes to mind is what I spoke of earlier, where, again, in the Nike environment, I was side hustling my way into design without permission. And some, creative friends in that environment gave me opportunities. They didn't have to do that, so. And mind you, I'm building evidence through those experiments, holding up shoes or innovation ideas, holding up evidence. And, that evidence was getting resonance with athletes or other stakeholders that saw that stuff. Like, oh, yeah. So I won some advocates, but still there was a lot of pessimists that were just like, it's going to take you forever to build up the bridge of evidence that we need to validate you. And it got to a point where I career-wise, I didn't know where to turn with these latent curiosities that were brewing, and I'm hustling. We're literally working a second job, not sleeping, just trying to build the evidence base to get that next job or, land that interview. And those opportunities, those doors weren't emerging. And if anything, there was a lot of hateration in the midst of those conversations, and sometimes some flat out just shut doors in my face, just like, don't see you doing this. Well, why? Not you. Not enough evidence, not you. And again, I had some access to continue to do the side hustle work, and to be told no, or there's no path forward for you, and to still wake up the next day. And again, I had access, I had a special badge to swipe that badge and go into a room where maybe at a peer level, people were feeling what I was doing, but the stakeholders that were the decision makers of what opportunities could be afforded were just, turning their nose up. And to still walk in those environments, put on a happy face, and still build evidence was very difficult. And to still be the constructive team member, put on a smile, deliver the work products, deliver value, was really hard in terms of swallowing the pill inside. But, I think it was an important lesson for me to personally go through, because as I continued to build evidence, to your earlier point, the evidence bred new sources of hope. Okay, if not here, what are the other ways to go about this? And I'm also looking outside Nike's walls, and I'm seeing the world beginning to really celebrate this notion of multidisciplinary innovation. This was also during the time of the rise of Apple with their, iPod in form of hardware connected to a digital service in iTunes. Nike and Apple were collaborating with Nike Plus, digital sport music. So these ecosystems of multidisciplinary thinking were emerging. I see a little bit of myself at this intersection. How can I accelerate my positioning? And so that's when I thought I was done with school, but the notion of school returned into the picture of I could galvanize my creative foundation by not waiting 10, 15 years to get validated here in the Nike environment. I could go to one of the best schools on the planet for this type of design. It would take 2 years of sacrifice, and that's painful. And I'm married, and our son was just born.
Mm.
which made it a very heavy moment. If there was time to not go to grad school,
Yeah.
you just have a child come into this world, you know?
Yeah. Imagine you're drowning and then add a baby.
And my wife and I are looking at, our newfound, commitment here. I try to keep this wonderful human alive and well.
Yeah.
We're going to step out of the workforce again to do school. But I think the tipping point was we looked at the evidence trail. I wasn't formally a designer in this company wall construct, but the evidence showed potential of my design lineage in conjunction with business and tech. This brewing evidence trail of what I could be. Mm-hmm. And I have this newfound doorway that would give me access to such an incredible school that would solidify my creative leg of the stool. If my son were in my shoes right now, I'd want him to do the same thing and jump and go for it. So he was the catalyst. His birth was the catalyst to go for it. And thankfully, we had an evidence trail pointing the way. And life has been, it hasn't been easy, but it's been a beautiful journey that I'm just so grateful for, and grateful that my son was the tipping point to make it happen.
I love that. I want to highlight a few things that you said that might resonate with some folks who are listening. For some folks, what you need to hear from this is that your kids don't even realize that they're waiting for you to bet on yourself.
Yes. Yes.
And it's so important that you bet on yourself. Yes, for you, but also for your kids. The other thing I want to highlight that you bring up is this question of what do I need to do to accelerate this vision and this path that I'm on? Mm-hmm. And what are the uncomfortable but probably great things that need to happen in light of that? So for some of you, that means going back to school. For some of you, that means working part-time instead of full-time so you can build out this idea, this vision that you have. For some of you, it means you need to move. I think there's a lot of us who are truly on the brink of something fulfilling, life-giving, amazing, but we aren't willing to ask the hard question of, am I willing to pay a cost? Am I willing to be uncomfortable for a season? And it's just a part of it. It's not even a part of like the game, so to speak. It's just a part of growth. Of you have to kind of have these moments of, what am I willing to sacrifice to get to point B? And when I mean sacrifice, I'm not talking about in the ways where a lot of our corporate experiences are framed sacrifice, which is betray and kill yourself in terms of working and grinding and breaking your spirit. That's not what I mean by sacrifice. What I mean by sacrifice is, what are you willing to exchange? What are you willing to let go of for your benefit, for your growth, for your healing, for your joy? Take your pick. But that's what I mean by sacrifice.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Yeah. When I'm thinking about this idea of times where I've had to fake hope in situations I was secretly losing faith, I'm going to bring it to more personal kind of wrestling, and I'll tie it back into how it made some of my wrestling with corporate, specifically the UX industry, click into place. So I'll start off with this statement. Not everyone will get this, but I'll flesh it out in a moment. I think that the evangelical church in America and the UX industry have a lot more in common than they think.
Oh, snap. Okay.
So I'm a Christian. I'll say I'm a recovering Christian. I'm figuring out what that means to be a Christian right now in this season of life. And, I think a large part of my wrestling, specifically over the last 6-7 years, has been around my relationship with church. And, I've recently come to this place, especially after a lot of experiences in evangelical churches, where claiming to care about people, care about justice, but when it came to racial justice, didn't want to talk about it. When it came to how do we think about, immigrants and the poor, didn't want to step up with that.
Oh boy.
Recently, I was attending this church, and I recently walked away in light of this pastor who, super proud about being courageous, quote unquote, in the gospel. And then when I asked him, why isn't he willing to talk about biblical justice with the church? He said, I don't feel called to that. And I was like,
Wow.
of course you don't. But I've had so many of these moments where I understand Jesus to be this Middle Eastern refugee that a lot of folks right now would actually hate.
Yep.
I understand what the values are around Christianity to be, but there's a huge disconnect here in terms of we care about people, but how we're showing it, it's not fully there. So I was kind of thinking about church, and I was always just trying to get back to this place of being healthy means I'm going to church on a regular basis. But I think for me, it kind of got to this place of recognizing that, when the very people and institutions that are supposed to represent love and justice and community actually become sources of harm, it's really hard to not have that shake you at your core. And it can be exhausting to keep putting your heart into faith communities only to be met with disappointment and hurt. And again, this is from a Christian experience, people who are Buddhists who've experienced this, people who are Muslim who've experienced this. This isn't uniquely anything to Christianity per se, but I'm talking about this experience for me. And I think for a long time I felt lost, but in reality I was kind of grieving the idea that church should be this safe place. But in reality I was just kind of grieving relationships with Christians who had let me down. I was grieving this kind of belonging that I wanted to have, but kept being denied. And it just kind of felt exhausting. And when I think about that in terms of the evangelical church and the UX industry, specifically corporate, both claiming to be about people, about care, about justice. But when it came time to actually embody those values, they failed spectacularly. Church preaching love, but then at times weaponizing it to control. A lot of well-known UX leaders preaching human-centered design, but only one that was built on exclusion and unchecked privilege. Both of these spaces kind of held up a vision of inclusion, but when challenged to actually change, they doubled down on power, on hierarchy, and on exclusion, on relevancy over maturity and growth. And so I kept trying, I kept hoping until I've recently just gotten to this place of just having like a switch. And what I've realized is that I'm not necessarily losing faith, but in reality, I was outgrowing some illusions. When I think about, both church and corporate spaces taught me that the structures that I was putting hope into weren't built for what I was putting hope into. They weren't operating the ways that they needed to. And so I turned to creativity because when institutions fail, art, storytelling, and vision making step in. Creativity kind of became the place where I didn't have to fake hope. I could build it. I could imagine new ways of being and create spaces where people could belong without conditions and find, the kind of faith that I needed that wasn't tied to these systems, but instead tied to the act of making, of dreaming, of daring to believe that something better is possible. So what does that mean for me? It means that, yeah, I still identify as a Christian, but I'm working through what that means. It means that I just bought the indigenous translation of the New Testament.
Oh, wow.
And I can't
Okay.
wait to dive into that.
Wow.
It means that I'm learning more about spirituality from, my ancestors and what that meant in terms of protection and care for loved ones. It means that I'm not kind of shaming myself into quote unquote doing these rituals as indicators of being a quote unquote good Christian. Same thing with UX and corporate. I'm not allowing myself to endure certain things in order to quote unquote be the good UX designer or the good corporate employee. There's a cost to that spirit. And I think I've been kind of just seeing the overlap of those two and just recognizing that I think what's been missing is that sense of curiosity and creativity. How do I relate to this in a healthier way?
Yeah.
How do I not put so much hope into institutions, church, the government, companies, employers, take your pick, right? But that's because hope is actually more of like a verb. It's more of an action than it is like this noun that I'm placing with certain people and certain things. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I've been mulling over as I've been kind of chewing on that question for today.
Wow, it was such a powerful set of parallels, and I'm a Christian as well, and I definitely have sat in churches where I didn't feel it. I didn't feel welcome. I didn't feel any sense of spirit, only maybe judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my senses are up in terms of any church home that I look for, and I have to be careful not to judge that group, that gathering, and go into those experiences with an open mind. But there's a big difference between the purity of faith, the gospel, and a religious institution that's protecting their status quo, the power, the privilege, the access points, all those things. And, institutions man will let you down, will let us down. And yeah, I love the parallel to design because, unfortunately, a lot of what gets celebrated is upholding pedagogies that were informed by very few people and tremendous power and privilege. And one of my sisters, a fellow author, is Ida Davis. Came out with a book recently called Kindred Creation, where she's just like, I wrote this book for me. What world did I want to create as a Black woman navigating this world? How can I tap back into the values that come from indigenous sort of practices, and what does community mean? And remembering some of those value systems that are born from the thousands of ways of knowing from around this planet versus what's come from the few voices from pedestals of power.
Yes. 100%. And I think for folks who are listening to this too, again, you can apply it to faith, you can apply it to corporate design, but it's about how do you recognize the moments where there is more of a commitment and loyalty to the exterior, to the what may be presenting as good and interesting versus the actual humans behind it and the work required to do that well and in a meaningful and human way.
Yep.
So I love what you brought up about being able to recognize and see power at play. When people are, again, they're just white knuckling their pearls and their pedestal. You will not take me off this pedestal. And it's not about taking people off. It's just about walking away. It's about being curious about how do I engage this thing that I care about, design, faith, being creative, whatever, in a different way. And it's giving yourself permission to explore that instead of just staying in the box that you're in and allowing that to break your spirit, allowing that to cause you to doubt, allowing that to cause you to not see the value and the power of design. But instead, it's step outside that box, explore other ways to engage with that, right? And be just curious about what that might look like.
Amen.
Yeah. Hey, this is Viviane, and I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. And I just wanted to pause for a quick moment to say that this podcast is ad-free on purpose. And we want to keep it that way so that it feels like a space that's just for us and just a little bit more divorced from noise on what we should buy and what we should consume. And so the best way to help us do that is by sharing it with someone you think would really connect with it, someone who you think would feel encouraged or get something out of this episode, or by leaving an honest review, because it helps more folks find us. And honestly, it could be the exact thing someone else needed to hear today, just because you took a moment to spread the word. So thanks for being here. I appreciate you, and let's get back to it. And, it's been making me think a lot about, in the same vein, innovation, right? And you see a lot of HBR articles and podcasts and companies talking about innovation. But there's really kind of this, how do I explain it? There's this elevation of this idea without actually considering what it will cost to do that well. There's a lot of hard truths that aren't being discussed around being creative, around innovation, because, we got to sell these magazines. We got to have these people click into these articles and not be like, ooh, that's hard. I don't want to do that. But I know this is something you've been thinking a lot about, especially within your work, within your book. I'm wondering, what has kind of surfaced for you? What have you noticed are maybe examples of hard truths about creativity and innovation that most people don't want to hear?
I definitely, the more recent runways that we've been a part of, call that multidisciplinary innovation, where you're literally gathering folks from different disciplines around the table to problem solve something that is a new opportunity. And ideally there's design at the table, strategists at the table, engineers at the table, representing the different disciplines. There's a tendency, and especially with the peak of design thinking over the last 10, 15 years, to grab a sprint framework and a roadmap and to get to work. You know, here's what we're going to do on day 1. And day 2, we're going to interview 10 people. And then day 3, you're going to hand over the insights. And
Don't forget the 2x2. We love a good 2x2.
we're going to frame what we heard in this 2x2. And, and you're going to build a prototype next week. And we're going to go back and test. And, okay. But I found a couple truths that have become paramount for me is when that team gets the agency, even it's like not everyone has the agency to innovate. Let's just be clear about that. But when you are able to ring fence a team and allow that team to spend some time together and really prioritize the time, the resources, the commitment to a journey, what I don't like to see is the team putting up a work plan on day 1. Because usually that work plan was informed by some dominant force at that table, some individual probably that has a strong hypothesis of what the right answer is on day 1, and they want to assert an agenda. And instead, I would love for that team to really air their baggage about where they came from, what are their working norms, their working preferences, what are their actual goals for the project from an individual perspective, and getting that room of people to begin to appreciate each other beyond the title on their business card, title on their placard, that they're a whole human being, being given the privilege, the affordance of being able to have a hand in shaping something new. So to do that, I need your whole person there. And again, we have to create a space of safety and security for them to feel like they can be their whole selves. Mm-hmm. But the richness of diverse insights, observations, patterns that we could recognize, all those things, examples, relationships that the team might already have with the target audiences and landscape that we're addressing. There's so much richness there that we overlook because of the speed of the clock, because of the work plan, because of some of the formulaics of what people expect. And so I think getting people to get to know each other is an important truth that I think a lot of teams gloss over too fast. And then 2, because you saw a sprint work on this project over here, especially when it comes to innovation, that same set of methods may break on your project. And things will break, and you're not in violation when it does. And so does your team fall apart? Do you fall apart when the methods that you're used to break? And so unfortunately, I think a lot of teams fall into this trap of being overly prescribed to a formulaic set of methods. And they don't really leverage the pure power of creativity in those moments and divorce themselves of some of the trodden stuff that's been overused. So getting people away from the formulaic is something that takes risk to do. You gotta not be afraid to fail, because sometimes you'll divorce yourself from a method and you'll fall on your face. But what comes from that is pure ingenuity. You will find a new way forward. And that new way forward could be very insightful and very purpose-driven in terms of the work. So I think as leaders, we need to create these safe spaces for teams to be able to do that and navigate the forest of ambiguity or the fuzzy front end. Pick your innovation analogy of what you don't know you're going to find and what you don't know you're going to create, and give yourself the freedom to be able to learn your way through that. And sometimes you're going to go forward, backward, sideways, and that's fine, because we're learning our way forward to make something that's going to hopefully be resonant and relevant. I will boldly say that the days of move fast and break things, that's intellectually lazy and stupid. Mm-hmm. So let's learn our way to the resonant, relevant outcome that's going to affect people's lives versus just checking boxes, creating a bunch of outputs that don't have any meaning beyond the company wall, just to say that we're doing stuff.
Yes, that part. And I feel like what you're proposing it's a mindset shift. It's a huge mindset shift. How would one start to make that journey towards adopting a mindset shift like that?
Well, what it does posit is change, and change is hard. And so no matter your best sensibilities around how you navigate a creative approach and how you bring others along, we also need to be mindful that there's transition management calories necessary to bring folks along. And so you might have an inclination to do something different and veer off the path because your convictions are pulling you in a direction and you want your team to sort of follow. But they need to see some evidence. What they can't probably tolerate is a bunch of theory about how you need to blow up this thing that's been used before. If they can't connect to why and see evidence in terms of why we need to go in a different direction, it will land as a bunch of theory to them. They won't see the what's in it for me. They won't see the connection to their norms, to their objectives, to their goals personally. And no matter how smart the idea is that you're pursuing, if people aren't invested in understanding and figuring out why they should be a part of that change, they're not going to do it. And that idea is dead in the water from day one. It's dead in the water. So I've learned the hard way on some projects that you gotta spend some calories educating others, and not, again, soapboxing a bunch of theory about how great design is or how great these creative approaches are. It's like, well, let's just try something. And let's educate each other on what we just learned and give ourselves permission, interrogate the evidence where we inform our convictions of why it makes sense to maybe do things differently. But it's usually a slow process before it becomes more widely understood.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think for managers and leaders who are tuning into this too, there is a responsibility that you have to cultivate emotional confidence and internal safety. Without these two things, it's really hard to adopt a mind shift like this that's required for true innovation and creativity. So emotional confidence and internal safety. What comes to mind for me is, how do we help people recalibrate the relationship with failure? Because a lot of times in corporate settings, we're told, try something new, be creative, but so help you God if you F that up. And so then people are waiting for the stick to come down on them as you're telling them to be creative and try something new. And it reminds me of this group. I'm assuming they're still around. They're called F'd Up Nights, but the actual word, F'd Up Nights. And I remember going to one of their events in Toronto. This was years ago. And when you go into the space, so essentially the space is they're inviting people to share ways where they've F'd up, where they've failed, and what came from that. What was the growth that came from that? What was the learning that came from that? And before you even go into the space, there's this wall called the F'd Up wall. And everyone can just anonymously put on sticky notes ways that they've F'd up, right? Across the board. That could be with work, relationships, what have you. And so it was just this moment of reminding people that it's okay. This is normal. And we're going to create space for this and wrestle through this together. And it was just a nice moment of connection. Even though it was anonymous, you didn't know who said what, it brought something that's often kept behind closed doors to the light. So even thinking about, what does it look like to help people feel more comfortable with failure? Maybe you do pre-mortems as well as post-mortems on your projects. How do you anticipate ways that failure might happen, right? And have people already kind of think about how they might relate to it when and if that happens. Having people think about what are the rituals within your teams that allow people to just acknowledge the ways that they've failed and messed up and what they learned from it without fear of retribution or punishment.
So important.
Yeah. Because, man, these therapy bills a lot of us are paying say that we need this. This is really important for us. Something you were saying, too, also just reminded me about the hard truth, which is that creativity, innovation is about endurance. It's not about genius. It's about endurance. And people want to believe that creativity is a gift, something that strikes the lucky in moments of divine inspiration. But the reality is that creativity isn't magic. It's work.
Yeah.
And most people aren't willing to do the kind of work that real innovation demands. True creativity isn't about just having one brilliant idea, right? It's about being willing to destroy 100 good ones to get to one that's just a little better than the good ones.
Yeah.
How do you tolerate discomfort and things being ambiguous? How do you relate to frustration and failure and exhaustion as you're trying to iterate and create something? And one of the ways I encourage people to think about this too is, yes, think about the ways you handle ambiguity and the frustration of failure and exhaustion in work, but how are you dealing with that in your relationships? How are you dealing with that with your kids? How are you dealing with that with your partner, your friends, your family, right? A lot of that crosses over. So if you are trash at that in your marriage, I promise you, this will be really hard in innovation and creativity. Yeah. I think creativity and innovation, it's an act of service. It's an act of love, right? You have to learn how to let certain things go in service of something better. And you have to be willing to do that from a place of curiosity and wonder. And the other thing I'll say too is I've had to learn and realize that there's a level of discipline that's required to be creative. And that means I need to protect my energy. So discipline around, am I going to let LinkedIn pull me into a bad mood for the rest of the day? Am I going to let this one person who I should have blocked years ago allow them to take away from that energy, right? No, I need to mute and block certain people. It means that I don't need to be watching How to Get Away with Murder again, the TV show for the 12th time, and go outside, give myself different inputs and being intentional in doing that, because it's something, creativity and innovation has to be nurtured, and discipline, thoughtfulness is a huge part of that.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it resonates because I think about what has worked or not worked in terms of how I feel on a particular project, no matter my level of contribution. I'm mindful of the calories of where I spend time because, especially in corporate arenas, everything will profess to be urgent, but isn't necessarily important. And I literally, in one of my books, I talk about the 3 buckets of calories. Usually there's calories to manage your stakeholders, to keep people informed, keep people aligned. If it's a client, making sure they're nurtured through a process, whatever it might be. The second bucket of calories is usually the production. Okay, I'm building slides because I'm going to go into this next stakeholder meeting. I got to be able to articulate the guiding principles, the why, the rhyme and reason, yada, yada, yada. And then the third bucket, which is the most precious for the work that we do, is the innovation, the creativity work, to the sense making, idea generation, diving super deep in needs and context and nuance to be able to make something that's relevant and resonant. But that third bucket is often sacrificed because of those first two getting way out of whack. So I'm especially mindful to establish my norms and boundaries in terms of the way that we need to work. I'm not going to show up to your daily stand-up meeting to go through a bunch of minutia when I need the mental space to be able to do what I need to do, or what the team needs to do what it needs to do. And we're going to show up at this critical meeting with our buffet table of stuff because we're working hard to accomplish these sets of goals. We're going to show up at that train station, if you will, with the goods, and you can trust that we will deliver that, and we'll have a generative conversation where we'll get your feedback in the right ways to make our next push that much more substantial. But we're not just gonna placate to formulaic behaviors just to make you feel good when our creativity is being sacrificed.
Yes, that part. Another thing too I'll add is, and it's probably not a popular opinion that's taught often, but I think that the more healed you are, the more you've worked on yourself, the more creative you'll be.
I agree.
I know even one of the symptoms that I know I've been healing from corporate America is I'm more creative. I'm meeting parts of myself that I didn't realize were pushed down for so long. And I feel there's an element of healing, and that's hard work. It's deep work that a lot of folks should be committing themselves to if they want to actually be creative and innovative. Now, some of you might be listening and be like, well, that's one tortured artist. They perform great works. And let me ask you, do you want to live that life? So why are you bringing up this example? No one wants to live that life.
I'm not cutting off my ear for anyone.
Yeah. Are you okay? Go to bed. Get off. Get out. Like, go away. So no one wants to live that life, right? Life is short. Life's too short for that, to have to endure.
Yeah.
And life's too short to have to endure even in your pursuit of and your relationship to creativity. So for some of you on this call, if you're looking for a sign, this is it. Go to therapy. Actually love yourself, commit to yourself, and bet on yourself by working through the things that you have been running from through burying yourself in work, in unhealthy relationships, or in unhealthy behaviors and patterns. This is it. This is the moment.
Love that.
So as we get close to just our time wrapping up, I'm always curious about how people are thinking about hindsight and foresight. I think it's a huge part of having a better understanding of how you want to move through the world and relate to the world. How do you want to learn from lessons from before? And, I'm wondering if the version of you from 10 years ago could see you now, what would surprise them the most?
Oh, goodness. 10 years ago, I probably was someone that was probably admittedly uncomfortable in my skin in some of these emerging spaces where all I saw maybe that was celebrated was that flavor of leadership that was very alpha, quote unquote, very assertive, very agenda driven, and extroverted, honestly. And no disrespect to extroverts. I just wasn't that person. I was, very, very much a very strong introvert. But when I reflect on that contrast, the convictions that I felt made me practice ways to authentically build extrovert muscles that were authentic to me. And I never would have dreamed 10 years ago to have been on some of the stages that I've had the privilege of being on, to be able to, have the privilege of writing my thoughts down in books that people buy and, enjoy. Those things were not even part of my vision or purpose at that time. I couldn't see those opportunities. But I think beginning to speak on convictions that I felt deep in my core that could help others, and learning to lean into that and experiment with that in terms of not assimilating into this alpha mentality of and trying to assert myself for the sake of power and access. Those things actually have become less important to me. But it's like, okay, what is my purpose truly? How do I weigh into that and understand that purpose and build muscles against that purpose? And when I speak up, even though I'm an introvert, you're going to feel authenticity when I do speak up.
Yeah. What I love about that too is, again, that's the version of you from 10 years ago. And imagine how much more life is still ahead.
Oh,
That's
I hope you're
exciting.
right.
Yeah. No, that's exciting. Yeah. And I think, for me, I think my 10-year ago self would be stunned that I let go of things that I once clung to, certain titles, institutions, people, without losing myself in the process. That I now lead in ways I never saw modeled, with courage that doesn't always feel good, but always feels right. That I'm able to live with a flavor of boldness that doesn't seek permission. And so I think, the most surprising thing for me 10 years ago is that I probably trust myself more today than I've ever trusted any system. And because of that, I'm building a life that no system could have ever designed for me.
Oh, love it. And so proud of you. Proud of you.
Thank you. Thanks for hanging out with us and diving into some of these real and unfiltered conversations. We know your time is valuable, and so we don't take it for granted. If today's episode made you think, if it challenged you, or gave you something new to consider, we'd love for you to hit that follow button on whatever streaming service you're using. That way, you'll never miss an episode when we drop them. And if you want to go even deeper, sign up for our newsletter at choosecourageinc.com, and you'll get updates on new episodes, access to exclusive freebies, and first dibs on coaching opportunities and other resources to help you make bold moves in your life and business. So we appreciate you, we see you, and we're rooting for you. Until next time, keep choosing courage over comfort, and a friendly reminder to drink some water.